So welcome back to our GCSE English on the online school. So today we're going to be continuing with unseen poetry. So today we're going to be focusing a little bit more on actually how we write a response rather than just the general principles and approach. So we will be using a load of different skills that we used on Tuesday's session. So you'll see a lot of things roll over, some new exciting stuff for you hopefully as well. So as usual, the session will be 45 minutes teaching and then 15 minutes for your questions. If you've got any questions either during or after, please do ping them along either in the Q&A function or the chat function, whichever is easiest for you. We'll both respond to them. Tilly is with us today, so if you've got any My Tutor online school specific questions, then she will be answering those for you in that 15-minute session at the end. Yeah, cracking. So let's get going. So this is our part 2 of our paper 2 question 3 for the unseen poetry, and we're looking at the first one. So we have our question 1, which is 24 marks, and our question 2, which is the comparison, which is much lower in our marks. So if you don't know me, my name is Vicki. So I've been tutoring with My Tutor since September. In that time I've done over 300 lessons. I trained as an English teacher last year, so I've got a PGCE and lots of experience hopefully. And I studied English language and linguistics as my undergrad. So that's a little bit about me. So let's get going. So today what I'd like you to come out of today's session is understanding what you need to do for the unseen poetry question. That's the big 3.1 question. And to understand the effects of poetic devices. So what does an unseen poetry question look like? So what do you guys know about the question so far? Have you got any clues, any ideas? If you don't know anything at all, that is absolutely fine. If you do, brilliant. So if you do know something, pop it in the chat. It could be something really small, like how many marks, what sort of style the question is going to look like, anything along those lines. Yep, so it is 24 marks. Absolutely, Louise, well done. It comes from a poem that we might not have seen before. Yeah, Ahmed, you're absolutely right. So you will find that it is very unlikely that you will have seen this poem before. They usually try to pick something that is relatively obscure. So nobody has an advantage. There are 2 questions, you are absolutely right. So we are focusing on the first question today, which is a 24 marker, the bigger one, where we're just looking at the one poem. Yeah, 2 unseen poems, and you compare them. Yeah, so that is, I think it's 8 marks for that second question. We won't be looking at that today, but I think we are looking at that at the back end of next week, I think. Right, so the sort of, I suppose the unfortunate thing, although at the same time you're not being overwhelmed by information, is that you're not given any context about the poem. So you're not able to comment on context, you're not able to draw sort of points together to make it more in depth, but that means that that's one less thing that you have to do, so it's slightly less underwhelming. Lovely, right, so our question looks like then, so this is the same slide as I showed you guys on Tuesday, just to remind you all. So you will get a question that says, how does the poet present, and then whatever, which is apt for that poem. The question does depend on the poem. It's not like your question 2 or your question 3 where it all pretty much stays exactly the same. That's on your language paper, so these do fluctuate, so I can't give you a strict this is what you're going to get like I could do with some of the language questions. Right, I'm going to attempt a Slido, so I'm hoping that this is going to go well. I've stolen this idea from Charlotte, so if you've been to Charlotte's tutorials, then you will know all about them. So I'm going to try and copy this into the chat. Hopefully it will work. Right, so, and it hasn't. Fantastic. It's going well so far this morning, guys. Right, hopefully that might do it. So where is my chat function? Ah, there it is. Oh, what's going on? There we go. Right, we're sorted, I think. So what I am asking you guys to do is, how confident do you feel with your annotating poetry so far? So you're great that you can do a variety of poetic features, you can do loads of in-depth analysis, you can identify and talk about their effects at a basic level, you can identify some features but struggle a little bit, and then you're really struggling and you're, I suppose, relatively concerned that you're not sure what's going on. So this is looking really positive so far. Fantastic. Just move this over here. Lovely. So that looks like quite a healthy level so far. So we've got some of you on great. That's fantastic. Our big one is good. So that's great as well. That's a really healthy place to be at this point. And we've got a relatively small percentage that think they're really struggling. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach today's session, and then we're going to come back and have another crack at this at the end, and hopefully we might see a little bit of difference. So hopefully we might go up a band each potentially. You might stay the same because I suppose it's quite difficult to segment yourself just based on one lesson. But that, I think that's relatively healthy. That's a really good indicator for me anyway. Right, so let's move you back over there. So the next thing I was going to ask you to do on Slido was how many poetic devices can you guys name? So whilst I try and work this out, there we go. So have a go at that one for me, please. And let's go on to present mode. So this is a really lovely one, which I saw Charlotte do and thought I need to do this. So how many poetic language and structural features can you remember that are specific to poetry? So remember we talked about a load on last session. Are you going to tell me that it's the same link? No, it's just Tilly posting it in. Fabulous. Right, so how many can you name? So we looked at sort of proud smile, which comes in, but can you name anything specific? Yeah, so we've got structure so far. Can you name any specific structural features? Onomatopoeia, yeah, absolutely. Onomatopoeia, we could also see in prose texts, but we can definitely see it in poetry as well. Absolutely. Lines, yeah, ending. Fantastic. Assonance, yeah, fantastic. Pathetic fallacy, yeah, so that one isn't specific to poetry, but we can, we do see it. Absolutely. Oh, you're absolutely pouring in now. Refrain, rhyme, couplets, beautiful, enjambment, caesura, fantastic. Sonnet, free, yeah, so that would be free verse, fantastic. Alliteration, yeah, so you would see alliteration in prose as well, but we definitely see it there as well. Lovely. Dramatic, yeah, so that's dramatic irony. Stanza, yeah, we've got irony coming in. This is fantastic. I love this. I'm going to definitely do this more. And so syndectic lists is the other one. Sibilance, yeah, so that isn't specific to poetry, but we do see it. Hyperbole, juxtaposition, beautiful metaphors. I think that's everyone, but it's really nice to see that even though you guys have put in something which isn't poetry specific, that the poetry specific ones are the ones that are coming in most. So that's stanza, verse, refrain, rhyme. We could have rhythm in there as well. Super impressed, guys. Well done. Right. So I'm going to leave those there. I've just put them in just in case you guys wanted me to go over any of those again. So if there was anything that popped up which you think, oh my goodness, I can't remember what that is, give me a shout and I'll go back over them, but I'm not going to go through all of them again unless someone sort of shouts and says, I can't remember what that is. So let's expand our vocab a little further. So these are 4 things that we are going to see in the poem that we are doing today. So can you guys match up the terminology on the left with the definition on the right? So for example, 1 and then B. That's not the right answer, by the way. Cyclical structure, yeah, you could have that one. Right, assonance has come up. I'm going to make a note of anything that you guys shout about in terms of terminology, and I will definitely come back to them at the end. So we've got assonance so far. So 3 to A, direct address. Yep, so speaking directly to someone, usually using the second person pronoun you. Fabulous. 1C. So anaphora, repeating the same word or phrase at the beginning of the line. Beautiful. Dialect. 2, going with D. The way somebody speaks depending on where they've come from. Yep. And then the expletive, using a word or phrase which is considered rude in society. Fantastic. Beautiful stuff, as always. Right, so this is our question then. In Halfcaste, what is going on? How does the poet present the speaker's attitudes to his identity? Right. So the assessment objectives that we are fulfilling. So we are looking at writers' methods and analysing language, form and structure and how they create meaning. So which pieces of terminology can you pick out that are absolutely key for what you need to be doing? So having a look at those assessment objectives we're fulfilling too. Which key pieces of terminology do you think are useful to bear in mind? So I think analysing language, form and structure, creating meanings. Yeah, absolutely. Subject terminology, critical style, textual references. What I think is really nice and good to remember is an informed personal response. So definitely talk about the reader, and you can talk about how it makes you feel. That is absolutely fine as well. Right. So today we're going to be looking at Halfcaste, which is by John Agard. So those of you who are doing the AQA Power and Conflict Poetry Bundle, you will have come across John Agard, who wrote Checking Out My History. He also wrote this poem, so I thought it would be a nice one to look at. I suppose just to expand your understanding on John Agard generally, but it's very, very different to Blessing. It's very different to what we looked at. So I'm going to hand over to John because he can, it's interesting how he actually talks and reads his poems. So we're going to listen to John Agard perform Halfcaste, and then we're going to have a little look at analysing it. Is there anyone else who can't hear it? Right, okay. Tilly, have you got any suggestions as to
Hey, could it be because your headphones are plugged in?
Yeah, let's try that. Let's unplug. Right.
Explain yourself
Yeah,
when you
got it now.
Fabulous.
when you say half caste. You mean when Picasso mixed red and green is a half caste canvas. Explain yourself what you mean when you say half caste. You mean when light and shadow mix in the sky is a half caste weather. In that case, England weather nearly always half caste. Some of them cloud half caste, tell them overcast. So spiteful, they don't want the sun to pass or rise. Explain yourself what you mean when you say half caste. You mean when Tchaikovsky sit down at the piano and mix a black key with a white key. It's a half caste symphony. Explain yourself what you mean. I listening to you with the keen half of the ear. I'm looking at you with the keen half of the eye. And when I'm introduced to you, you must understand why I offer half a hand. And when I sleep at night, I close half an eye. Consequently, I dream half a dream. And when moon begin to glow, I half cast. Human being cast half a shadow. But come back tomorrow with the whole of your mind, and the whole of your eye, and the whole of your ear. And I'll tell you the other half of my story.
Right. So that is John Agard reading Halfcaste for us. So, general thoughts, feelings, ideas about that poem so far. What do you think is? I think John Agard is quite a unique poetry reader. So, why do you think I think that he's unique? What does he do in the way that he speaks, which is quite different to sort of the general poetry recital? Yeah, so he's speaking in his dialect. He's very expressive. He does sound angry. It's quite an attacking poem. Absolutely, it is a performance, isn't it? Absolutely. He's almost singing. He's sort of halfway between speaking and singing. He is being really over dramatic. He's using his entire body. He's gesturing. So there's visual indicators for the audience, and he elongates Halfcaste on a couple of occasions, like you would do if you were singing. And he does that quite frequently in his poetry. If you watch him reading Checking Out My History, it's very sing-songy as well. So that's why I've got you to listen to how he speaks it, just because I could not do it justice in the way that he can. Right, so excuse me standing on one leg, I'm half caste. So does anyone know what half caste means and why it's a problem? Why he feels he's had to write a poem about it? Some really interesting thoughts. So it is half caste was a discriminatory term used for people of mixed race, which sort of made them feel subhuman, sort of mixed blood, and made it sound very negative, and it's absolutely not. It's something that generally has gone out of fashion. It isn't something that I've heard anyone say for a very long time. It was a term that was heavily used in the 70s and 80s. It's something which we don't tend to use anymore. There's sort of other things in place. It's sort of, the term's gone out of fashion. It's not a particularly common one anymore, but that's not to say that it isn't used. Yeah, it is racist. Absolutely, nail on the head. It is a racist term. It is discriminatory. And it relates to his background, absolutely. Right, so, excuse me standing on one leg, I'm half caste. So, what can we take from that? First things first is that we can say that it's apologetic. Where's my mouse gone? lost my mouse. It's very apologetic. It's sort of quite sarcastic. So it's really sort of apologetic, but in a sarcastic tone. Now, can you remember what type of irony sarcasm is? Verbal, yeah, absolutely. So it's verbal irony. So we've got a nice difference there today. So explain yourself what you mean when you say half-caste. Now, these 3 lines come back time and time and again. So we've got a refrain going on here, which is really nice. Don't often see them in poems, well, at least in the bundles that you guys will be studying. We can also notice that there's he's using dialect, so he's using non-standard English to demonstrate that. So he's using that to establish his background. Then we've got some repetition. So we've got mean coming up time and time again. Within these refrains, a mean does come up somewhere else, I believe. So we've got this coming up here as our refrain. Then he refers to sort of these metaphors essentially, and suggests a direct comparison, which is problematic. These are direct comparisons, things that are mixed, which society deems to be acceptable and cultural. So these are pieces of evidence, essentially. And he's tackling society's sort of ingrained thoughts. He's challenging. We've got rhetorical questions, which I missed out here. So what do you mean? And have I said direct address? I haven't said direct address. So we've got direct address with you. Obviously, it's not spelt correctly, but that is for dialect purposes to establish his own identity. We've also got some near rhymes going on. So cast and canvas is relatively close. We've got green and mean, but we've got generally it's quite irregular. So we've got an irregular rhyming scheme going on. There's no sort of really clear pattern, like we can't say A, B, A, C, that sort of thing. We can't label it with letters. Right. He talks about the weather, so we could essentially say we've got some pathetic fallacy going on here. Pathetic fallacy. And we've got the repetition of mix going on as well. And this goes on for quite some time. Yeah, they're examples of history. Absolutely, you are right. There is absolutely no punctuation in this. So that would be what we call a free verse. Absolutely. Right. So, well, in that case, England weather nearly always half-caste. So we've got some ungrammatical. So we would say it is nearly always half-caste. In fact, some of them clouds half-caste till them overcast. So sort of attacking England and its viewpoint in a way, because that is where he's received the racial slurs from. We've got mixing in disguise here, which I've missed off, which is a really nice example of personification. Right, talking about this variety of weather going on, we've got a load of negative connotations. So the idea that, our weather is rubbish, and it being overcast and sort of that expanding to the rest of the people who have been racist. We've got a little bit of sibilance going on here. And a ras. So this is our expletive. So Harass means it is a Creole term for my arse. That's what that means. So it is an expletive. It's showing his anger. Then we've got continuing of clear comparisons. We come back to the refrain here, so it's frequently interrupted. We've got a really nice oxymoron here. So black with a white key. So we've got a really nice oxymoron there, which is juxtaposing. And that is really important as well. So you're saying that's a very clear comparison, that black and white being mixed together in music is absolutely fine, but black and white races being mixed together to create half caste is seen as something which is wrong and which is incredibly racist. But in other aspects of society, of life, it's seen as a good thing. So why isn't it seen as a good thing here? It's really building up a strong argument. We've got another refrain coming in here. Now, this bit I think is really, really sad. So explain yourself what you mean. I'm listening to you with the keen half of my ear. So I think it's really sad that he's sort of what someone said really nice was subhuman, that he is not respected and feels that he has to protect himself. So he says keen half of my ear. So the keen meaning that sort of the best part, meaning that he's looking out for attack essentially, which is incredibly sad. And we've got repetition going on as well there. So listening and looking with the keen half of me, and then whatever. Really not good at the dialect for this. It sounds very odd coming out of my mouth. And when I'm introduced to you, I'm sure you'll understand why I offer you half a hand. So it's starting to get very attacking. There's a lack of respect. Obviously, this is all an extended metaphor, because you can't offer half of a body part unless it's actually been taken out of your body, essentially. And then we've got some really nice rhyming going on down here. So we've got, I apologise that I'm rushing through this, guys. So we've got some really nice rhyming of shadow, glow, tomorrow, really irregular stanza lengths, which is quite common in free verse, but you'll notice that sort of the majority of his argument, so he starts off and then he builds up and has a really big stanza and then brings it back down again. So it goes short, massive, and then comes back down, sort of like a really nice curvature on a graph. So this is sort of, I suppose, summing up, and this is his conclusion. So we've almost got a introduction and a conclusion going on here. I haven't mentioned anaphora. So that is explain yourself. So in these refrains, that's anaphora. I feel like I've missed one that I gave you guys earlier. Oh no, I have got them all, that's fine. So there's absolutely loads going on. Right, so really speedily rush through that, which I suppose is sort of the sort of thing that you would do in the exam. This is sort of something that, this is sort of more what your exam paper might look like if you've done it in pen, essentially. Right, so in terms of our Flutters graph then, so we've got free verse, we've got no punctuation, we've got irregular stanza lengths, no clear rhyming system, and we've also sort of got an introduction and a conclusion going on, and some rhetorical questions. So there's loads you can say about form and structure. Refrain, absolutely loads. This is a really nice one, I think, for form and structure. I'm not going to fill in the language devices one, just because we've pretty much done that actually on the text itself. attitudes of the poet, narrator, speaker. So there's a very strong sense of identity. We also see sort of quite a lot of anger, upset, and I suppose turmoil, sense of being an outsider. This person has clearly suffered a lot of racism. So I think there's loads you could write about for the attitudes of the speaker. I think it's so strongly put, very different to Blessing. So our main theme then is racism and discrimination, and then challenging society's norms. And I suppose sort of conflict as well, and power, in the sense that he's proposing that some races have more power over others, and that's how racism works effectively. So emotivity of mood, so we've definitely got some verbal irony going on and sarcasm. We've definitely got an allegory going on here. So allegory, remember, is a political message. So the political message is that all people should be treated equally, and race shouldn't be used against somebody. Absolutely right. So that's that one filled in. So in terms of this one, I think this is quite an uncomfortable poem, but it definitely challenges our thought processes. It's incredibly thought-provoking, and I suppose makes us reflect on history and how things have changed and why that's a good thing, and sort of the trouble and upset people faced, well now, but more so throughout history, because of their race. I suppose quite a lot of sympathy, guilt, and I suppose difficulty, maybe for some people, difficulty accepting how one race has treated another, in the sense that feeling terrible that that sort of English people have treated people who have mixed race in the past terribly, and that being quite a difficult thing to accept, that somebody would do that. So not difficulty accepting in the way that that it happened, but accepting that that was okay at a time, and that was sort of really difficult. Yeah, incredibly patriotic, yeah, lovely. So this was written, I think, in the 70s. So this was still at a time where you could discriminate against someone because of their race. In big cities, you would have signs saying sort of like rooms to let, no blacks, no Irish, things like that, where that was okay to do. We didn't have sort of strict segregation like countries like South Africa did, or America, not quite in the same way, but there was a definite sort of segregation in who thought who was better than who based on race. Sibilance is the repetition of the certain sound, so it's a special type of alliteration. So sounds with this one, so I think the main thing that you should be commenting on here is irregular rhyming scheme, and dialect. I don't think that you can write about this poem without talking about dialect, particularly when you're talking about the speaker's attitudes towards identity. So I'm going to have a little crack at writing a example response for you. It won't be the entirety of what you will be expected to do, just because we don't have time to write an entire essay. Let's blow this up a bit so you guys can see. So I started off by saying "a guard" just to show off that I know who the author is. So Agar begins a poem by mock apologising to the reader. Excuse me. This first short stanza, so I'm just getting a little bit of terminology in here, demonstrates Agar's frustration. So I'm getting in his own attitudes here and mocking tone, so technique as he challenges the reader to hear uncomfortable truths. So then that's sort of more talking about how the reader might react. The metaphor, standing here on one leg, demonstrates his anger towards the people labelling him as half-caste. Now, an important thing to make sure that you do here is make sure that you get that dash in between half and caste, because it's easy to forget, but when it's right in front of you, the examiner won't be too impressed if you forget it, because it's right there in front of you to copy. So, which leads him to believe that he is not seen as a full person. I'm going to put in what that lovely person said, perhaps subhuman. Here Agar attacks the Western world's use of the term and the demeaning negative connotation. So I'm just making sure I get loads of terminology in here in my analysis that are inseparable from the term. See what you guys have just popped up. Yeah, so I don't think he's apologising with the term excuse me. So when you say it's an interpretation, isn't it? My interpretation is that he's being very mocking and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm here," which is generally what we use "excuse me" for, rather than saying "excuse me," like what on earth do you think you're doing? Because he is standing on one leg, it's talking more about him than the other person. If you're saying "excuse me, what do you think you're doing, calling me half-caste?" Then I would definitely go with that interpretation, rather than "excuse me, standing here on one leg," which suggests that he's in the way. So that's my interpretation for it, but you could interpret it in another way, and that is absolutely fine. Right, this free verse, I'm getting a little bit more about structure in here, because I think this is a really nice one to use. This free verse poem is regularly interrupted by the refrain. So I'm just going to show you how to get in more than one line and signify it. When you say half-caste, so if you're looking at more than one line, if you put a slash in between, that signifies the end of the line. This could signify, so I'm using tentative language, so this could signify the never-ending racism that Agar has suffered. So I'm talking about his feelings, and that it's potentially metaphorical. Alternatively, so I'm now showing off and saying it could be this as well. Agar's mind may consistently remind him of the racism he has been a victim of. Showing that he that his distress is inescapable. So the first interpretation that I've given is quite a straightforward one. The second one is I'm sort of trying to, I suppose, look at the psychological effects and perhaps give an alternative viewpoint. And I think this particular view is quite a deep one. Then I'm going to explain the effect of repeating it on several occasions now. So by repeating these lines on several occasions, Agard directly addresses the reader, holding them to account for their actions. So this is almost like a trial by poetry, essentially. He's really trying to tackle the problems that he's faced, and he's trying to make the reader feel uncomfortable, so they actually have a sort of long, hard look at how perhaps they've acted, or how they could potentially help in society and tackle these issues. And then I'm going to give my evidence for that. Explain yourself. Right. So this imperative, so an imperative is when you are told to do something. So if I say explain yourself, what do you think you're doing? Which is essentially what he's doing, is saying, tell me what you think you are doing, because this is wrong. It's an instruction. This imperative, which directly addresses the reader, so I'm talking about direct address, so I've got another feature in there, could make the reader question society's treatment of those who have been racially discriminated against, as well as feeling remorse. So I'm talking about the reader's thoughts and feelings, and how they directly link to the theme and what Agard has said. So I'm then going to take that a bit further by saying, by holding the reader to account, Agard demonstrates a passion for his heritage. So I'm linking this back to the question in terms of his attitudes towards identity, and a strong connection to his racial identity. Right. The poet begins to support his argument. So I'm talking more about the dialogue throughout this, by using socially prestigious. So I'm getting in some advanced vocab there. Socially prestigious examples of mixing colours. So when Picasso, so he doesn't even use capital letters for proper nouns as well, which is interesting. This metaphor outlines, so I'm looking at a language device now, outlines how outrageous society's judgments, I'm going to make that tentative, this metaphor could possibly outline, I think, how outrageous society's judgment is of mixing colours, as Agard argues. Agard argues that art's colour mixing is equal to two people of different racial backgrounds having a child. This evidence could therefore refute and highlight the absurdity of the issue. So I've given 3 quite chunky paragraphs there. I don't think sort of writing them up does them justice, but in terms of what they look like on a piece of paper, that's a page and a half of writing. My handwriting is reasonably big. I'll show you sort of size of my handwriting. But you know, that's a big chunk of your work already done. So if we go back to sort of our Flutters table, I haven't really talked about sounds yet, so I think that's probably something that I'd sort of come on to next. I've talked about readers' thoughts and feelings. I've talked about themes. I've talked about the emotivity of the language used, but I haven't actually. I've talked about sarcasm, I suppose, but there's definitely room to put some allegory in there as well, which I think is a really important thing to get in. So that could be something I could go on to do next. I've talked quite a lot about the poet's attitudes, but that's really important because that is almost the question: how does the poet present the speaker's attitudes towards identity? Attitudes is in there, so we definitely need to be doing that in every paragraph. I've talked about some language devices, so I've started to tick some of those boxes off. I've mentioned that it's free verse, so I've started to talk about form and structure, but there's definitely some extra bits I could go on and talk about there. I think this is a really nice one for form and structure, actually, because this is not your average poem, is it? There's a lot of very playful things going on here. Right, so questions then. So we are coming towards the end of our session today. So if you have any questions, please throw them my way, and then we will do a little Slido just to see how you guys have got on with this lesson, whether you think you've improved slightly in terms of how you understand the question, that sort of thing. Yeah, there is a lot of annotating going on, and when it comes to actually talking about it in your exam and how much time you spend annotating, you don't need to do it in as much detail as I can. So yeah, don't feel that you've got to absolutely plaster the page before you start writing. Just pick out a few key things that you think are really important. Sort of bear that Flutters in mind and think, have I ticked off one thing for every one of those boxes? And that's a really nice success criteria for you. Right, sibilants and assonance. So let's flick back to assonance. So assonance is repetition of the same vowel sound. So we've got repetitions of two vowel sounds here. So the E sound, so Peter, and the I, Piper. So Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. So that's what assonance is. Sibilance is alliteration, a special type of alliteration, so the repetition of a s or sh sound across two or more words that are either next to or very close together. So for example, the seagulls screeched and squawked, something like that. That's a rubbish example, but it is an example. How long would I suggest annotating? I'd say 5 minutes, and then get cracking. It is a longer paper. 24 marks for the first question, which is what we've been working on today. So 24 markers, and then your comparison I think is 8, so much smaller. Oh, joinmyquiz.com. I will definitely have a look at that. Halfcaste is one of the poems normally teach for unseen poetry. Specifically unseen poetry, that is dependent on every school's. It's definitely quite a popular poem to teach just generally at school. It's something that I've taught in schools. So, oh, thank you, Emma. That's lovely to hear. Is that anaphora? Not so anaphora is the repetition of words or phrases at the beginning of a line in poetry. So that's the answer to that question. So what we will do then for the last little section is I will get my second second one up for my Slido, and I'll pop it in the messaging chat. There we go. So have a crack onto that one. It'd be really interesting just to see if any of you sort of, there's a fluctuation in sort of what was the winning one, whether anything's gone up and down. It'd be really interesting. So have a look at that one. I will definitely do a quiz on the unseen poetry, which we're doing on Friday. Definitely doing a quiz. I won't be doing a quiz on Tuesday. So Tuesday we're doing paper 2 question 4. And we're doing that on Thursday as well. So we're doing a part 1 and a part 2. So there won't be one on Tuesday, just because we're starting sort of a new topic effectively. I might do one at the end actually, but I promise more quizzes will come your way. Really do love a quiz. Yeah, so there's no lesson tomorrow because it's bank holiday. Right, let's get some more people on this active poll for me, please. So far so good. Mainly on good, so that's really nice. Got a couple of people on great, so that's lovely to see. Also as well, in terms of unseen poetry, if there is anything which you think, oh, we haven't covered that yet, and I've sort of covered it in school and I'm not quite sure how on earth I do that, now would be a really good time to shout those things out, because we'll be doing some unseen poetry on Friday, but we'll be doing the comparison question. So please do sort of give me a shout so I can do that for you guys, so you are getting the best out of me that you possibly can. So this is looking very positive. So we've got we're mainly on good. We've got then great's our next best one. Then we've got okay, and then I'm struggling. So I think that is definitely better. Can I see what we had at the beginning? Can I see 2 at the same time? Probably not. So I think this was our one at the beginning. Maybe it wasn't. So I think definitely we had good at the start, didn't we? Good was at the top. But I think our okays and our I'm struggling is about the same, but I think we've got more people going up to good than there was at okay. So that's really lovely to see, guys. Right, so any questions, shout them at me now, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. But I think, yeah, Friday's a bank holiday, so you won't be seeing me tomorrow, unfortunately. Yeah, so no lessons tomorrow at all across my tutor. Fabulous, guys. That's really lovely to see. That's really helpful for me as well, in terms of what I'm doing with you guys and whether it's helping you. Right, Tilly, have you found any questions that I haven't answered? I think there was a question about IGCSE as well.
So there was a question, when is maths? We have a maths session this afternoon at 2. It's on finding the equations of a circle and tangent. And then the question on, will we be doing IGCSE? Not currently, no. So we're sticking with sort of pure GCSE at the moment. Of course, there's always content overlap with other types of levels and subjects, so lots of what you're doing could be relevant, but we're just
actually on IGCSE, just a little, so I've been teaching an IGCSE EdXL recently, and the questions and the syllabus is pretty much the same. It's just how the questions are presented. So for example, in the EdXL IGCSE you have a question, I think it's maybe a 12 marker, which is talk about language and structure. So you have language and structure combined in Edexcel, whereas in AQA you have language separate to structure. You have 2 questions. So generally it's all pretty much the same stuff in terms of the syllabus. It's just how it's presented and how you write your answers are slightly differently. So most of the content that we actually go over will be translatable for you guys.
Brilliant, thanks Vicky, that's really helpful. So let's just have a look. Oh, there was a question. What's a euphemism?
A euphemism is saying something that's a bit negative in a positive way. So a euphemism would be so saying oh, she's passed away instead of saying she's died. It's a slightly nice way of saying that, or oh, she's gone to sleep, something like that. A dysphemism is the opposite, so saying something which is positive negatively, or saying something which is negative in an even more negative way. So for example, for oh, someone's died, she's kicked the bucket, which makes it sound very insignificant. So that's what euphemism is, and that's what dysphemism is.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just having a look through. I can't see any other questions currently. Guys, let us know if you have any more. As Vicky mentioned, tomorrow's bank holiday, so no lessons at all tomorrow, but we will be back on Monday with our usual programme, and the timetable for next week's sessions will be up later this afternoon, so you can have a look ahead, plan your week next week as well. Let's just have a look. Oh, and thank you, Emma, for sending through the link to a quiz on unseen poetry. As Vicky said, she'll look into quizzes for another session, because you guys like the interactive stuff, which is great. It doesn't look like there are any more questions. Do you have anything to add, Vicky?
No, I think that's pretty much it, isn't it?
Brilliant. Thanks so much for today's session, and thank you guys for interacting so much. It's great to see. If you join us for any other sessions, then we have maths and chemistry this afternoon, but if not, then have a great bank holiday weekend, and we'll see you next week in the next English session. Bye.
Bye.